Okay, here we go. Thanks for joining us again. Tiffany Bailey is here to give us our talk on universal design for instruction or universal design for learning. Tiffany Bailey has a Master's of Science in Education from the Student Affairs in Higher Education program at Colorado State. She's been working at the Disability Services profession since 2006. She was an assistant director, then interim director at UNC Greensboro until 2010 when she came to UNC as the assistant director. And in 2013, she was named the director to the Office of Accessibility Resources and Services at UNC. Right. Right. Okay. Great. All the things. All the things. I'm gonna. Yeah. Okay. That's perfect. We don't need details. So I'm gonna share our screen so that Tiffany can take over. Sure. I'm loving Zoom these days as well. Okay. And so are our students, which is great, because we're using it a lot for some of our accommodation meetings for our students who are distance education students or have a little bit of a more interesting schedule, especially for our graduate and professional student population who are doing numerous things. Sometimes their calendars are not always their own. Sorry, I'm going to turn the sound off. Or I can't fix it to do it, so I'm just going to do what you're doing. Okay, sounds great. Sounds great. So again, I'm Tiffany Bailey. It's nice to see you all, and to be present virtually with folks that I can't see, but that's okay. I look forward to hearing from you if you have questions. I have a really laid back presentation style. My partner in crime, Simon Bloor, who you've already met, who came to talk about digital accessibility, and he and I created this PowerPoint. And so really, I just want it to be a discussion, ask questions that you might have. I am by no means like an expert in this area, but we know enough because we work with students with disabilities on a daily basis. And these are some things that we're recommending to faculty and folks for best practice. So you see, I always love this illustration of different types of animals being expected to climb the tree. Have you all seen this graphic before? Yeah, it's pretty common in terms of like the visualization of equal access, right? And so we can't expect everybody to be able to climb the tree with the skills and abilities or things that they already have. Sometimes they may need a little bit of assistance, or again, we may need to have different ways for them to climb the tree, okay? Right, so, whoops. Okay. So I'm going to get here in a second, but I think what I first want you all to kind of think about is the principles of universal design are about, they apply to not only learning and instruction, but construction, architecture. The University North Carolina State is the home of kind of universal design in construction and architecture. And so some of those principles were then adapted for more of the learning and instruction environment. But basically, the spirit of it is that you are making sure that the most amount of people have access, no matter how they choose to identify. And you're thinking about who's coming to you, whether it be for a program, in your class, your fellow classmates, whatever it might be, who have different experiences and different things that you need to consider when you're presenting essential information, right? Okay, so basically in plain kind of English, universal design and learning talks about presenting content to students in multiple ways. How many of you have been in classes where you've had information is online, it's also printed out in your textbook, and your professor's lecturing on it. So you're getting information 3 different ways and in 3 different mediums. That's kind of the idea. How are we presenting it in multiple ways so that people, based on their own learning styles, can digest it in that way, right? Encouraging students to engage with new ideas and information in multiple ways. So thinking about activities in the class, whether it be individual group projects, it's about group participation, group work, and it could be a number of other things. We're going to go over some more examples. And then assessing students in multiple ways. So I remember very vividly, and I don't remember a lot from my freshman year just because my memory is bad, not for any other reasons, just saying. But I had this introductory political science class in which the final was worth probably 75% of my grade. So day one, we went in with a full classroom. Class number 2, half the classroom had gone, right? And I was like, I'm going to stick it out because I don't feel like going through the hassle of changing. But that assessment was a make it or break it, right? And it also was one in which the professor said, there's no way you're going to get all of the points on this test. So you need to pick and choose the sections that are worth the most amount of points and do those. Let me just say, that aside, the professor was pretty awesome. But I was like, what the heck have I got myself into here? But I ended up doing really well. So I was, we had this whole little study group and we bonded together. So it was wonderful. But if you're not a great test taker, right, and that's really high stakes, you're asking somebody to essentially base their entire grade on one thing. So it's, again, assessing in multiple ways to be less high stakes. So maybe it's tests are worth 25%, and you have an individual or a group project, depending on what you'd like to do, worth 25% or less than that, right? So thinking about, again, how are we structuring things to make it accessible to the most amount of people? So for those folks who aren't good test takers, and I'm not typically, like, freak myself out studying to the wee hours of the morning. Okay, so principles for effective instruction, and I'm going to read these, and I hope that's okay. I don't want to make any assumptions here, but teaching materials available using different ways to represent content. So we talked about books, handouts, information on Sakai, accessible information on Sakai. We'll talk about that, right? Because PDFs, oh, it's not so great. So always, right? Just make sure they're accessible. Instructional materials offer students different ways to engage with the material. Assessment options offer different options for students to demonstrate the mastery. So, okay. What I always tell folks, especially faculty or people that are developing classes, and I'm focusing most on the syllabus here in this slide, but the syllabus from our context, from more of a legal point of view, right, given that we're in accessibility resources, is really looked at as a contract between the student and the instructor. And I tell faculty members and instructors to make sure that you are clearly listing out everything that is to be anticipated in a course so that students can use their best judgment and discretion to determine if this is the best class for them. So, for example, if we were talking about an art history class or an art studio art class is a perfect example, in which attendance is mandatory and an essential piece of that class, that should be listed in the syllabus, because there has to be, you're going to be creating works of art, you're going to be having other people critique your work of art, the instructor is providing critique on what you're doing, right? So all of that should be listed in the syllabus and not be a surprise. It's about those essential components and the course objectives and learning outcomes. So again, I talked about attendance, participation. Sometimes, there may be an assumption made, well, this is a class and, participation is essential. Well, you don't say that in your syllabus. And so from our perspective, when we have faculty contact us where a student may have participation challenges for whatever reason, based on their disability, they will say, well, this is an essential component of our class. And I'm like, show me where you specified that's clearly listed for students and that they're aware. And tell me where you take them through how you're describing what that looks like. And then the grading policy. So that is also key, I think. How many of you have had instructors who you may not have gotten a syllabus ever for the class? Yeah, or it's been so minimal, you're like, I don't even know what's going on. Like, when am I supposed to get this project in, etc. Okay, so it's about giving people all of the information and thinking strategically about how you're creating the course. Giving examples of assignments and rubrics. I love this idea. Have you all had instructors who have done this before? It's great to have a visual, right? Especially on any kind of project that you might be doing, or something where you're like, what is the expectation here? Because I could write something that I think is absolutely amazing and turn it in, and you may think it's the biggest piece of crap. So please tell me what you're looking for here, okay? Providing an assessment schedule or an exam schedule, a quiz schedule, that is critical. Those things can move around, but again, it's about people being able to prepare for what's coming up. So if I think about, from my perspective, for students with disabilities, there's a lot of pre-planning that goes in. For somebody with a chronic medical condition, for example, they might not be feeling their best every day. And so it's really important for them to plan and know what's coming up. So when they're feeling well, they can use that time most effectively. So if a faculty member doesn't have that information specified and you go to class today, for example, and they say, okay, we're going to have a test on Monday, but there are already things that were competing, and now you're having a flare in your condition. It's like a perfect storm, okay? Just as an example. Choosing digital textbooks and making the reading list available early. This is an easy one. Not everybody uses traditional print text, right? There are students who use screen readers, and that includes students who are blind or who have learning disabilities or other challenges as well. We have a lot of students with mental health challenges where maybe medications are impacting their processing speed and their ability to kind of retain information, who use text-to-speech to help them. So they're not only getting it in a visual way, but they're hearing it as well. So something to think about. This is one of the things that we try to push a lot, because then what we are doing, what our office is doing on the backside, is that we're taking that traditional print text and we are contacting the publisher. And if you know anything about working with publishers, it can be really challenging at times. I think they've gotten better about providing us accessible textbooks in a timely format. But still, and then ultimately, if they can't provide us with an accessible copy of the text, we are cutting the binding off of the book using OCR technology, scanning it in, and then scanning it in using OCR technology, and then going through and manually cleaning up the book once it's been converted into a Word doc. Yes. Any questions about it? It can be time consuming too. So, and imagine if you're a student who has not only just one textbook, but your instructor has copied chapter 1 of the most obscure text you can think of and has posted it up for you to read. So we're also, the student is looking to us to convert that as well. So especially if it's not, if it's a photocopied, right? Just not embedded text, so a screen reader can't read that. So questions so far? No? Okay. Okay. This is more kind of about in class and how to engage people. How many of you have known somebody who just loves color a little bit too much, either on their website or in their PowerPoints, et cetera, right? So we try to get people to think about what are good contrasting colors that you can use. We usually, when we do presentations, we'll always use a white background with black text on that. Carolina blue is particularly problematic. In all, our ITS folks have done really well with kind of changing the color slightly, right, with not completely altering it. So it, anyway, so that the contrast is great, but I'm thinking if you're like Carolina blue background with white lettering or whatever it might be. So there are contrast checkers and things like that that can assist, but just being mindful of that and what that means. Including images and videos. And with your images and your videos, especially your videos, making sure that they're closed captioned. How many of you are watching Netflix or Hulu or live streaming things and turning on the captioning when you watch? I always do. For everything now. So, and it's becoming a little bit more what I would say, kind of mainstream. And folks are kind of realizing that closed captioning benefits everyone, not just folks who have a hearing loss. And some people are in the library listening and engaging in material, and they don't want to maybe put their earbuds in, they turn on the closed captioning, and all of those things are happening.
Yeah, I'm gonna do
I usually do. Okay. Do you want me to just continue on? Okay. And then always, if there are images, right, in PowerPoint, that you're kind of describing what the image is. The classroom with people seated in chairs and at, like, pulled up to desks. Something really clear, not too detailed, right? I'm not sure you need to go with stacks of books on the desk and the teacher's wearing a blue tie, and right, but just something clear that describes the overall picture. So that's the case here, that's the case on the web, that's the case in in other kinds of like Word documents and things like that, because if not, what's going to happen is the screen reader is just going to look over that and be like blank, like there's nothing there for them to see, right? Or to digest, I should say. But make the notes and outline view of the PowerPoint available in advance, in class, and after class. Sometimes that's challenging, and I think that some faculty will make it available after, but not before, because they're afraid if they make it before, students aren't going to go to class, right? And I appreciate that. But if you are thinking intentionally about how you're designing your class, right, where you're being engaging, you have, participation is one of the key kind of components in whatever way or shape or form you decide for that to be. I get that concern, but it's helpful, right? And so especially for, again, not just thinking about it from a student with a disability perspective, but for folks who don't have disabilities, just thinking, what do I need to anticipate happening in this lecture? Let me get my own notes and outline ready to go for the lecture, because I can prep a little bit more and just be ready to be note-taking and kind of, hit the ground running. Avoiding red and green, because colorblind issues and other kinds of things. Those are the biggest two colors I think that I would avoid. So, okay. Different ways of representing essential course content. We talked about videos, caption videos, podcasts, websites, and then some people are also using graphical representations. Have you all been using those at all? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, we're going to get there. Mind maps and flow charts, basically. So I keep wanting to come over here to the keyboard, but it looks like this, right? It's a little bit busy, but where you have a main idea and then you're kind of brainstorming. So if I was creating my own graphical representation about ARS, it would be identification with ARS, fill out a self-ID, and submit your documentation. And once those two things are completed, then you will be invited to have an accommodation meeting. And then from that, you will send your instructor notification letters. So it's just thinking about that in a more linear way for people to kind of visualize it from a visual learner. Let me see if I can go back. Okay. I think that's pretty much talking about scaffolding, having students construct their own to consolidate information and to make it digestible for them, and allowing time within class to do these things, right? And using a visual representation of that. And there are some tools like Poplet, XMind, FreeMind that you all can take a look at. We've had students who are using this to prepare for many different things. It could be a paper outline. It could be to explain a rather challenging concept for them to wrap their heads around, if they're using a study group, et cetera. And I don't know, I'm trying to come up with a particular example, but I'm thinking about like an organic chemistry and chemical reactions and this, and this kind of a situation. So, but also even in English and main ideas. So we're studying World War II, and we're gonna start from Pearl Harbor and then move on from that. So Okay. Handouts. Yes. How many of you actually have instructors who give handouts now, like paper handouts in class? Is this still fairly common? Okay. Huh?
I was gonna say not for me.
Yeah. I was like, I wonder if this is still, I still know instructors, and I can't remember their names, but who are using, like, you know, just writing on the chalkboard kind of, which is great. I love the chalkboard and writing on the chalkboard, but that and then traditional, like, overlays on overhead and with the, yeah, it is old school, but I was like, oh, it works. I mean, we're just fixing it, but, so things to think about in this are any kind of handout or material that you're putting out. What's the font size? The font, the size, the justification. We have some tips and recommendations for the font to use. It's interesting. I had a parent come in with their incoming student. I can't remember because the weeks are blurring together. This feels like it's been 2 weeks today. It's just in this 4-day period. But yeah, but our business cards have larger font on them for obvious reasons. And she's like, wow, this is great. I was like, isn't it though? Mm-hmm. Like, it's just clear, it's easy to read. I mean, I find myself having a challenging time sometimes reading people's business cards, especially, you know, their email addresses. So again, an example of using a larger font, size, and using specific font to help in terms with the digestion of information. Electronic handouts, so using styles to organize the headings in Word. This is a big one and easy to do. If you think about it, especially for screen readers, if you went in, I love myself some bold, right? I will bold the headings, whatever, but that's not going to help if you don't organize and use the styles within your Word document, because it's not going to make it searchable for somebody with a screen reader. And so something to kind of keep in mind and use for accessibility purposes, and then also use the accessibility checker in Word. And there are multiple accessibility checkers that are just kind of out there and available. One, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but one website that we're trying to put a lot of information in is digitalaccess.unc.edu, which Simon, I'm sure, shared last time, potentially, maybe not. Nobody knows? digitalaccess.unc.edu. So if you go there, we're really trying to give some, we being ourselves, ITS, Equal Opportunity and Compliance, folks that are working on larger digital access initiatives on campus, information that people can use, web developers, et cetera, about making materials accessible. So something to take a look at, okay? PDFs can be made accessible, but again, it's more work, right? And so Word document, if it's created in a way that's easy to navigate, is the most accessible. PDFs can be kind of a pain at times.
Yes. Question. What? Why Helvetica? What is? Do you know what exactly?
Studies have proven that that particular font, that there's something about it that it's just makes it easier for folks to read, that more digestible information, especially students with learning disabilities and ADHD, etc. So who knows? I don't know. This is what I hear. This is what we hear. Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to add to the Helvetica thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it is good on print, but it's not really a web-safe font.
Yeah. Right.
It doesn't work on all devices.
Mm-hmm.
It's also copyrighted, so it's hard to get permission to actually use it on most sites anyways.
On websites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's definitely great for print, though.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why, I mean, Simon strategically said it in relation to the handouts particular piece and not on the website as well. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is it about PDFs that makes them so
annoying? Yes. I think it's that depending on, so it's about the text and how it can be manipulated within the PDF document, and that's what makes it annoying. So thank you for asking, because if the words aren't searchable, there's nothing for students the screen readers to capture onto to read, right? And so I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about that. I think the other piece that's challenging, you know, sometimes we get from some offices that they want to use PDFs because they don't want people to be able to edit the information or the handout that we have available. And so then it becomes, how do I make it accessible so that the screen reader can read the text and also have free form fields within that? And so it just adds a little bit of the layer of complexity. I'm not sure that, I mean, I definitely don't know how to do all of that. Folks in here, PDF whizzes? Yes. Huzzah!
I can also give you that. What's the recommendation though, if you have a PDF and you want to make it accessible? Is it just a matter of converting it to a Word document, or? I think that's
Adobe Acrobat, which is available with Creative
Yep.
Cloud, you can go through and make edit changes directly within the PDF without having to convert it back and forth.
Yep.
You can also, like if you're trying to do screen reading, you can actually just run a screen reader on it and check it for yourself if it
You
works well.
Yep. There are a lot of free screen readers out there. Students can actually get ClaroRead, which is a text-to-speech program for free through software acquisitions that's available. So something to think about and consider, and it has its own OCR capabilities within that, which I feel like that's a hidden gem. But if you feel like you want to uncover the gem, you go to software acquisitions and you can get it. And we use it periodically, predominantly actually for converting in our office. So. Again, it's about making the handouts or materials available before. It's about outline notes. Maybe an instructor posts their general notes or outline before or after class, right? And then I think we talk about it a little bit later, but we also suggest that as a class, people identify a note taker. I do this in any kind of group that I'm in typically. If we're in a large group, committee meeting, whatever it might be, who's going to take notes for the group? Not that folks aren't going to take their own notes, but it's nice to have a designated note taker. And then that person shares their notes with the rest of the class. And then checking accessibility of the PowerPoints to be made available online. So, yes. Offer different ways to involve students. And I know I've talked about this a couple of different times, but classes involving small group work, whole class discussion, hands-on activities, right? Again, it's about appealing to multiple people's learning styles and making sure that they're able to digest the information. Kind of an opportunity to pause, to have a natural break in the class where students can kind of collect themselves and think about, or you know, this is the case for me as well, think about how I wanted to summarize the information that I was hearing. I mean, I'm sure we've all been in lectures before where we feel like the faculty member has talked to us for 50 minutes. And you just don't know how they breathe because there hasn't been a pause and you're writing frantically to keep up. It's just kind of about that natural pause to allow a little bit more of a time and reflection and consolidation. Discussion of questions, notes, and content, kind of a think, pair, share. Doing a short assignment. So at the end of the class, like a short writing assignment or a graphical representation of maybe what's learned as an assessment even for not only what a student has learned, but how effective the instructor has been, right, for that particular lecture on that day. I think I'm hitting all the things over here. Yeah, problems they encountered, what they liked and did not like about the lesson, how they understood the concept. So the one interesting thing I will say about, well, I think we're going to get there. So this more dramatically talking and thinking about a flipped classroom kind of a style. Have you all been in that type of classroom setting? Thoughts about it?
What does that mean?
Yes. There's variations of. So where more of the content and lectures are available outside of the class, and then you come to class prepared to engage in conversations around the content. Basically, is my layman's terms. It's what?
That's revolutionary.
Some people are using, you know, some people will play the lectures that they video recorded in the class for a period of time, and people are doing it in various different ways. So thoughts on folks who've had that type of classroom experience?
I really enjoy when instructors have the class time devoted to doing homework.
Yes. and are available to answer questions. Yep, thoughts. I saw some yeses for flipped classroom up here. If folks have experienced it. I hear mixed feedback.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. It was a while ago, and it was for like a programming class kind of. So it was kind of difficult. So like if I didn't know what I was doing, and then we come to class and like do an exercise, and then it was difficult. It was a little more difficult, and we're in a computer lab, so it's not like I had a whole lot of like discussion time. So sometimes it worked for me, and sometimes it didn't so much.
Yeah. I worked with one student who had to spend a significant amount of time, right, outside of class digesting materials. Yeah. And so watching the lectures outside of the class in preparation for the class, in addition to all of the reading, was kind of an overwhelming experience, right? And where she really wanted to be able to go into the classroom and listen to the professor and synthesize that, information in that way. And I, definitely get that. So again, I've heard a mixed bag. Recording classes, much like we're recording this, and have it posted outside so people can go back to. There's also some great technology and other things that are available for recording. So as an accommodation, we are loaning out audio note taker, which essentially, how many of you know about LiveScribe smart pens? A little bit old, there's the kid, old school now. People are still using it, but essentially you can record via an app on your phone or with your laptop, and then the online platform is one in which you can pull in the PowerPoint that the presenter or instructor is using. You can there's a note-taking pane, and then there's your audio recording, and you can go through and highlight the priority audio sections or delete fluff, and so that it's paired directly with the slide and what I was talking about at this particular point in time, for example. So it's pretty amazing.
You now have pins that record and like timestamp it.
Yep. Yes. Podcasts, Google Docs, offering Skype or Google Hangouts for meetings, advising and to offer feedback, or Zoom as well, right? It's great. Encouraging partnership and group work, like study buddies and that kind of thing. I mean, there are some folks that don't want others to talk with people outside of class about the material, right? Especially as it might relate, to an exam. And there is some kind of fear, right, with Google Docs and other types of things that people are using it as a mechanism to share information that's on examinations that maybe other students haven't taken yet. That happens, but there are ways to think creatively about, how to put the parameters around it to make sure that everybody is following the instrument here at UNC.
Like not reusing the same test over and over.
And that's true too. Yes, where it becomes files and yes. I have been starting to tell instructors that I just think it's good practice to probably have 4 or 5 versions of a test that is equitable, right? So we're having, situations, and this is not uncommon, just for students where life happens and they need to miss a test. And then a faculty member is like, well, I'm going to have to spend all this time writing another exam. It's something you can think of at the beginning to go ahead and write version A through D of your exam so that you can dust those off and give them out as you need to. So I don't know, I've written one exam when I taught Education 130, which is not really, it was great, but it was more of, just a free-flowing kind of exam. And so I understand that it's challenging, especially if you're getting into, economics, for example, and where you're changing all of the figures and all of the narrative. Like, I totally get it. So, but yeah, doing it at the beginning is the best part. So, offering options or different ways for assignments that assignments can be completed. So again, we've talked about some of these, or I've mentioned some of these, like oral presentations, videos, creating some kind of game or a project, other ways to be assessed, activities using different number combos like individuals, partners, small groups, model processes and suggest timescales, offer opportunities to refine a submission or reallow submission following feedback. I love this strategy, especially for larger papers or projects where, again, at that assessment point where you know how you're doing. It's not graded, it's a lower stakes, so then when you're ready to turn in the big assignment, it's already been looked at. Testing accommodations. I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to take a moment and take a pause. Universal design and learning would say that if you had a 50-minute class and you wanted to make sure that everybody had additional time, right? You design something that maybe takes 20 minutes and let the entire class take the entire time of the class. However, legally, from an accommodation perspective, even if you did that for our purposes, we would still, you're giving everybody 50 minutes as an instructor, which means that we give people an hour and 15 if it's 50% additional time, okay? So this is kind of one of the areas where there's a little bit of a collision. So we've had it in the past, and this is, I think, come out basically in, not so long ago, case law in which they found that a university was in violation and did discriminate against a student with a disability because they didn't permit them the full amount of extended time that they were entitled to, even though the professor designed the assessment to only take a specific amount of time. That was well below what, that was like 20 minutes of the 50-minute class. Does that make sense? So it's kind of, that was an interesting one, where universal design and the law clash and collide. So,
that's interesting though, because we have had a lot of discussions about like people who don't have resources to get diagnoses or people
yes.
who don't choose to disclose and like. Yeah, that's interesting.
It is interesting. Happens more so, I think, with finals, right? Where faculty will say, this finals is designed to take 1 hour, and that's typically what it's taken people in the past, but I'm giving everybody 3. So the student with 50% additional time will have a 4 hours and 30 minutes. Yeah.
And in the school things,
some of them it did, right.
It's not gonna hurt anyone.
That's true.
But yeah, that's just another thing to think about when we talk about that whole discussion about disclosure and non-disclosure.
And extended time, right, is interesting in terms of, people, there's one camp that says, if you don't know it, you don't know it. So it doesn't matter how much time somebody gets. I mean, are they really going to be able to demonstrate, knowledge if they don't know it? That's one. Have you? You're Zoom.
I mean, that's not how people work.
I know. I'm just saying, this is what. Yep. And then other folks who feel like, providing more time if it isn't warranted is an unfair advantage.
Also not how people work.
I know. Just saying, this is what folks from a
unfair
to if we provide, it's just about the granting of extended time, right? And how 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100% is how I'm kind of thinking about it. And how people look at how do we know how much more time a student needs to complete an assessment that is equitable and leveling the playing field versus is there a point at which too much time is being granted for this particular assessment because it creates an unfair advantage. Does that make sense? Hard to assess and measure all of that.
Well, I guess you're comparing students, right? If you're
That's true.
A curve, or if the goal is to like rank your students.
And that's each class is here, especially it's so different that some of the classes, this is not an issue, and some, I would say we hear from, it's very individualistic. So some classes it's more pertinent than it is for others, right? So, other testing accommodations. So low distraction environment, stopped clock, basically, we are granting that so students can stop and manage the conditions of their disability or the symptoms of their disability, the impact if they're having a panic attack or they need to attend to their chronic medical condition. But you could structure these things, again, somewhat into your class. If you wanted to design an assessment that takes 1 hour and you gave everybody 2, and we're fine with giving students with disabilities whatever extended time they had based on that, you can still use that principle. Providing a natural break in class for people, like during the test, to be able to step out, brief. I mean, what are folks going to do? They're going to go down the hallway into the bathroom. They may utilize those. I don't know. I'm like, what are they going to do? Maybe, I don't know. We have had that happen before, like pull up, you know, it's desperate times call for desperate measures, right? And so I never, we have a testing center as a part of our office where we proctor students with disabilities. And so it's interesting. So we see students who are using unauthorized aids. And so for me, it's always like, man, they must be feeling really, you know, stressed and what's going on in their life to have gotten them to, you know, to make them want to use a particular aid on an exam. We can talk about that a little bit later, but I try to, you know, we look at it more from people have bad behaviors sometimes. Let me just use my 5-year-old. People have bad behaviors, including myself. Sometimes I'm not going to hold it against somebody. So one of the biggest challenges I think we run into are quizzes in terms of accommodating. And even though I know that they are awesome assessments for faculty, if there are lower stakes quizzes to kind of assess and check in, but if they are a part of a class, like class time, that's when it gets really interesting. Because if you think about a student who's using accommodations, when are you allowing time for them to have the extended time? I have a 5-minute quiz. I'm like, okay. And then, but I can't, you know, are you allowing students to come in 5 minutes early to test? The students are concerned about disclosure. So is there a separate room that you can use? Are you using pop quizzes? Don't even get me started. Don't use pop quizzes. That's my,
Why not?
my message to you is don't do it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. So let me tell you about here's how I structure my non-quiz. They're writing exercises. You've done this, right? And what I do, tell me what you think. And okay, help me fix it if it's wrong.
Okay, great. Okay.
So I do, we know that this is a standing thing 4 times a semester, right? We can have a writing exercise, it's a 10-minute writing exercise, an open book that is a short question or summary of something that you were supposed to read the night before. It opens up and it closes in Sakai 10 minutes later. And then at the end of class, it reopens until the following night at midnight.
Oh, okay, great.
You can go back and change it, and I'm not going to grade it until after that. But then what that does is tell me, like, what you submitted the first time, and then I get to see what you submit after it reopens, because that's what Sakai does.
I like it.
Okay.
Yes,
But
I
if
do.
there's something wrong, like, I want to fix it.
Well, you know, no, I mean, I don't think that necessarily there's something wrong. I mean, because you're giving people an opportunity afterwards to tweak and refine it, and you're just using that as an initial measure of, and you know, what we've done in the past for students where there's been that type of quiz, it just depends on the student, right? I mean, because what they would be required to legally versus what a student is comfortable with and comfortable with an instructor. So for example, if an instructor said, listen, don't worry about everything that you can get down, that's fine. I'm gonna look just generally at what you've done just to make sure you have an understanding. And if there's that type of relationship, then, and the 2 people feel comfortable about that, then that's great. But legally, then they would have to be providing more time if we look at it from that perspective, where a student might say, this instructor and I have had an interesting relationship, and I am not quite for sure that I feel comfortable with them even just assessing my brief 10-minute, you know, 10-minute writing objectively. But I think, how long do you keep it open till the next class period?
No,
24
hours, like the plus 24. So
Yeah.
the next day at midnight. So class is at 9:30 in
Yeah.
the morning, so open till the
Almost
following.
like a quiz / take-home assignment.
Yeah, and everybody is like
Yeah.
a page of writing.
Yeah. Then I think that you're providing the opportunity for people to go back and tweak. And if you're setting parameters to say, this is only a 1-page one page, just do it within the time that you have, within the time frame that it's open, and tweak it, I don't see any problems with that.
So how can I make it worse? Like, how can it be horrible?
How can it be horrible?
Well, I'm asking because, like, people in this room are gonna see
Yeah.
people things, right? So, like, what would be, what would be bad?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I think what would be bad is having it be set for 10 minutes and then not allowing any additional time afterwards, or a more narrow amount, like time frame, without parameters. So if you very clearly said one page, you can go in and refine, you have this much time, do the business, versus not saying how many pages or that exact structure, right? It's like a free-for-all. So I do this 10-minute prompt, and then after class, am I 4 pages, 5 pages? Let me just write everything I know on this, right? So I think that's what would make it bad.
Okay.
Lack of clarity and
Okay.
okay.
Improvement for self.
Thank you. You're welcome. By the way, we being Simon and I are really looking for a class where an instructor is just developing the concept so that we can work with them from point A to point B to make sure that we design it with universal design principles in mind. And we've offered it to folks.
Can we nominate someone? Is there a process for that?
Is it me?
Okay. You know, we invite ourselves to, when we know that somebody's, like if we hear from our fellow faculty or instructors that somebody's designing a class, we will reach out to say, hey, word on the street is that you are developing a new class, and let us help you with the content. Sometimes that has worked, right? There is not one class that we've looked at from start to finish that we've incorporated all universal design practices and principles. We talked about it with the education, it's the University 101 class, and I know in the School of Education, and we've kind of, we're working with them about some strategies related to that, universal design strategies. So, okay, so quizzes. Have them, be mindful of them, don't have pop quizzes. I once had a student, like a faculty member was adamant about pop quizzes in their class. Okay. In order to have it be a true pop quiz, so that the student didn't know, and right, because it was about how do I use my extended time and how do I plan to use that. The instructor emailed between 9 and 9:30 in the morning before the 10 o'clock class, and the student was supposed to be on email so that if they knew that the pop quiz was happening, that they would go over to his office hours, right before class started, and start testing and then testing. I know, I see people's faces, I know, a mess. So it's that kind of level of negotiation, right? Pop quizzes present.
As someone who commutes, that's ridiculous.
And it just so happened that was worked out. I mean, at the end, the student felt comfortable with the resolution. The faculty felt good about it. So I was like, well, okay, you feel good about it. Because they had already been on campus, and they had a natural break, and they were just kind of studying. So they're like, yeah, I'll just check my email. Okay. So again, remaining true to the pop quiz. Don't have them.
So actually, as an instructional designer for like a decade, this is one of my biggest cookies for trying out hybrid or online learning, is that for your quizzes or your assessments and putting them on Sakai, you don't have to have any disclosure in class to use any extra accommodations.
Yes. And it's easy. Well, the newest update of Sakai is going to make it easier to give individuals extra time.
Right, you have to make it.
Right, I know, because prior to that, some instructors were like, oh man, I'm like, yeah, I concur, but I just, do this. We have to do it. One of our student leaders help you, I don't know. So again, just kind of 3 main areas, variety of assessment options, different types of instructional delivery, and then providing materials in multiple formats, pre and post class. So, and it's a benefit for everyone, which is great. Because if you think about the comparison of universal design, like in architecture, airport bathrooms with no doors, brilliant. Push buttons, helpful for everyone. Curb cuts, that kind of thing, right? Larger bathroom stalls, actual accessible larger bathroom stalls, not ones that they say they're accessible and I can't get my scooter in, just saying. I know. I mean, thankfully I can, I use this for my long distance travel, and I'm barely mobile. I can walk, but I just find it ironic that my scooter's parked outside of the bathroom stall as an accessible stall when I'm going to the bathroom. Oh, the good times. So I did have a turn and talk, but let's just talk about just what questions do you all have? Suggestions, thoughts? Yes.
Sorry to be monopolizing your time.
No.
But in one of our readings earlier in the semester, there was limitations on universal design in general as philosophy, and I'd love your thoughts on how to respond to these two in particular, which was that product design using or learning design with using UD might not be accessible in practice, just like the example that you shared with us earlier.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't necessarily require designers to work with disabled people.
Oh, yes.
How would you respond to that if you were, say, writing a paper on universal design?
My. Okay. So,
Pop quiz.
yes, I know. I'll take my scarf off of there. That's my hair. No, I'm kidding. I feel like, I acknowledge that there are some instances, right, where universal design may not be, right, where there's a collision. It's like the example that I provided. So repeat your questions for me. That would be great.
So the first is that it might not be universally accessible in practice.
Yes.
And then the second is that it doesn't necessarily require disabled people to be involved in the design process.
That's true. But when are people, people I know are asking people with disabilities to be involved in the design practice anyway, right? So I feel like it's like 6 of one and half dozen of the other. Universal design gives a framework and allows opportunity to address that. And there's, I don't know any instructor that, again, why we're having to chase people down to say, hey, can we help you design your class from a universal design perspective? And individually educating people to say, have you thought about maybe doing this a little bit differently? It's hard as a staff member to tell an instructor how I think they might want to tweak their class. So you can imagine that conversation is delicate. It's a delicate one, diplomatic. Some people are more open to it than others, but right, there's definitely a hierarchy because I'm not a faculty member. Sometimes I think, not for all, but some, right, are like, what do you know about it? What do you know about it? I'm like, well, I see the impact on students. So that would be for that. And then I think, universal design not being accessible. Repeat it again for me. I'm asking.
It may not be accessible in practice.
In practice.
Even though it follows all of the framework.
Yeah. I mean, if you are assessing, though, how effective that it is and whether or not how it's working in practice, then I feel like you could make the judgment of, okay, right, if you're checking in with students, like this doesn't make sense or this isn't working for everyone. If you're creating that type of environment where students either are providing the verbal feedback or you're checking in with them, like these are my problems with this. So those are my two kind of somewhat interesting answers. My mind is frazzled today. Yes.
Well, yeah, I feel like it's nothing's going to be
right.
a pen panacea
Right.
that requires,
Right.
I mean, that alleviates your responsibility to check in.
Mm-hmm. I think about it in the work that we do sometimes from a social model of disability and versus a medical model of disability, right? And does everybody know about the models? Yes. So just in how the practice of what we do, the social model and the medical model sometimes clash, right? Because we are looking at the documentation and the information to determine what the impact is, to determine what accommodation to make to address the barrier. And there are some times when we can talk about the environment and we can try to make it as accessible as possible, but it doesn't always happen. Like, it doesn't always come to fruition. I feel like sometimes we are more of the fixing, right, place than we are of the proactive place. And not that we don't try to be proactive, but the volume of, here are the issues that we're experiencing, right, in our classroom. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
I think so.
Or even just on campus in general.
Kind of like the discussion we had with Steve about special education law, right? Like legal frameworks to some extent are medical and to some extent are social.
Yeah.
Right? And they're a lot of times about like remedy and compliance.
Yes.
And not always about like sort of like more holistic,
Yes.
creating environments that are whatever. So I can see how some of those clash some of the time.
Yeah. So I think about that then in terms of it's not always accessible for, folks in the practice.
But the alternative would be to do what? Nothing? Or not
Yes.
do it? I don't know.
Man. Yeah. Well, I think I also see, I think what's interesting now, right, we're talking about it from a resource perspective and how people are designing their class, because there are more classes, students are wanting more classes. There are, I feel like, fewer faculty or faculty taking on more classes. And so a lot of times, some of the things that we've talked about from a universal design perspective are a little bit more time intensive in terms of the faculty member instructor's involvement. And if you have 3 classes with 400 students in each class and you don't have a TA, that is a significant amount of work. So I think there are some times when we talk to instructors and they say, yeah, I would love to do this and I'm incorporating it to the best of my abilities, but it's difficult. The reason I have 4 tests that I have people write, multiple choice and do Scantron on is because I can't manage the students, assessment in any other way. There are just too many. So I think that's also really unfortunate. Obviously, I see it happening more, I think, from a more of a science perspective, right? Or some of our general education introductory classes, like the Biology 101, Chem, Psych, large volumes of students in those classes. I can't even imagine having a class with 400 people in it, to be honest with you, teaching it and being in it as a student. So I think sometimes universal design lends itself more to particular disciplines depending on, right, just how the nature of it. Okay. The other things we put some campus resources together. There are some easy things you can do. So at the digitalaccess.unc.edu, there's a PowerPoint template that's uploaded that Simon just put on there right before I came over here for you all. It's an accessible PowerPoint template that ITS shared. Something about Twitter and hashtags. Anybody tweeting here? I do not have a Twitter. All right, I'm impressed. I am. But it's thinking about capitalizing words within your hashtag. Yes. And then, let's see, in any of your kind of social media posts, thinking about the video piece and the pictures, describing that, this is a video of, this is a picture of, and then videos with closed caption. The law is catchy. We're in a really interesting place, right? As technology evolves, and then what do the regulations say about best practice as it relates to Twitter and Instagram and all of the things. Fascinating. And let's see what else I have to say. Yes.
I have a couple of questions from online.
Yes. Oh, great.
Is how do you deal with professors or students who are not native English speakers?
Oh, yes.
And it can be difficult for people to understand what's needed just in general, even if they are.
Yes.
Require accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
And then another question would
Yes.
be, does the constantly changing technologies and different platforms offer specific challenges you can speak on?
Yes, indeed. Okay, so let me start with question number 1, which I'll ask you to repeat. I appreciate it.
How do you deal with faculty
Yes.
students who are not native
Yes.
English speakers?
I think, it goes back to making your information clear and concise, right? If we think about it for, in speaking in, really kind of direct, language about what is required, and then making yourself available, right, to be answering questions, clarification questions, and things like that. We get this a lot. The Writing Center here actually will works with students, we're ESL, and they have provided some great resources. Just as an FYI, if folks have not heard about that or checked it out, they're pretty phenomenal. Gigi Taylor is the one that kind of heads that up, and she's amazing in that regard. But I think it's about making the information, again, clear, direct, and easy to wade through. So this, I'll admit, sometimes I take way too long to explain a simple thing. So if you're thinking about, I'm writing in the way that I'm speaking, going back and editing and say, how can I cut out some of this to get down to what I'm actually asking people to do, right? And I'm sure you all have experienced that with various people in various ways. People's websites that are too wordy, where you're like, what? So that's what I would suggest in that regard, and I hope that was helpful, online folks. Hello. And then I think with the emerging technologies, there are challenges, but then also really positive things, depending on kind of what's happening. But I think the challenge is, let me see if I can, is just the non-accessibility of, right? And people wanting to adopt something and use it, and it's not accessible. And I have not told people, no, you can't do that, right? I think it's interesting, where I've just said it's not accessible to all, so you shouldn't be using it, is typically how I frame it. But there is such a thing as, where's the balance of accepting some risk to try out a new technology that maybe will become accessible versus making sure it's already accessible before we adopt it, and then knowing if somebody has a challenge with it and it's not working, that you completely cut it out, right? There was a huge lawsuit about this through the University of Arizona State, like a faculty member using Kindle in this class, and at that point in time was not accessible. It's been quite some time. And so then the student filed a complaint about discrimination because it wasn't accessible and they weren't able to use the information, and then they had to discontinue use for the entire class, as they should have. They shouldn't have been using it to begin with, in my opinion. But so I think I'm not answering the question very well, but it's very gray, and we try to consult the best that we can with folks on it. The digital access initiative that's happening on campus, my hope is that this is not my hope, there is going to be a digital accessibility program here, in which there will be a head of digital accessibility and then accessibility consultants to be able to talk to you about and put information out about, here's what we're doing and here's how we're moving forward, including procurement, right? Purchasing of software and technology. So
is that going to be administrative or academic? The digital access is going to be like
it's an ITS, so it's administrative.
So we talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago, but this presents a real challenge for professional schools, right? Because there's a lot. So our students have to be trained on what's used in the field,
yes,
right, to some degree,
which isn't always accessible.
right?
Yes.
And so then it's like we're in this weird catch-22 where it's like,
right,
I can't really influence purchasing for job spaces, right? But
Right.
students need to learn
Yeah.
how to use things that are used in the field, but these things are not always accessible, and that's really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't expect you to have an answer to that. But
I was like, thank goodness, but I'm not sure that I do. I'm just saying, yeah, I know.
It's something
Yeah.
that's come up before.
Yeah.
Like,
And we'll
really
continue
hard.
to. Yeah. Well, and I think too, you know, if you're thinking about it from a technical standard perspective, right? The non-academic standard kind of piece of it, or even about, you know, talking about a profession standard, is that these are the things that people are using out in the world, and we are teaching students to use these things, even though that they are not accessible. But what you are teaching students to also do in collaboration with us is, how do I make that accessible, or what's an equivalent that essentially could, you know, be the same thing, right? A similar platform that is accessible.
Or you go out and you make things.
Or you, yes,
Yeah.
making it.
Okay.
Okay.
Wrap up because we're actually in overtime?
Yes.
But thank you so much.
Thank you all. Call us anytime. And if you ever decide you want to teach here and you're creating a class, call me. Just call us, and we can help you. Yeah. So, but again, the principles apply to a lot of different things. So appreciate your time.